He abused a prisoner without knowing who she really was. Subscribe and write in the comments where you're watching from. It was early spring in Washington, D.C., but Rachel Moore felt nothing of its warmth. The city bloomed as usual. Pink cherry blossoms lined the streets. Tourists moved in packs, snapping photos of monuments. But for her, time had turned stagnant. She stood motionless by the windows of her federal office building, watching a flag ripple in the wind while clutching an envelope to her chest. The seal of the Department of Justice glared back at her, official and unfeeling. Inside the envelope was the autopsy report of her niece, Lauren Moore, 22, honors student, daughter of Rachel's late brother. 4 months earlier, Lauren had been arrested in Biloxi, Mississippi, for what the police described as attempted retail fraud. A carton of baby formula. Security footage never surfaced. Lauren's public defender had filed one motion before the case went cold, and her client disappeared into the prison system. The family received no calls, no letters, no confirmation of transfer, only a death certificate delivered with bureaucratic coldness. The certificate claimed a heroin overdose. Lauren had never touched a drug in her life. Rachel, a seasoned federal analyst in institutional accountability, had seen hundreds of falsified reports, massaged data, redacted confessions. She knew the game. But seeing Lauren's name on a fake cause of death report made her heart burn with a fury she hadn't felt in decades. When the body arrived, things got worse. Rachel had insisted on a private coroner. The state's autopsy was shallow, filled with boilerplate language, but Dr. Hayworth, who owed Rachel a favor from a past whistleblower case, delivered the truth in a hushed voice over the stainless steel table. "Multiple surgical removals," he said, lifting the sheet. "Kidneys, liver, uterus, surgical precision. She didn't die of heroin, Rachel. This girl was harvested." Rachel didn't flinch, not then. She only asked to be left alone with the body. In that sterile, silent room, she sat beside Lauren's pale, sewn-shut form and wept for the first time in years. The same hands that had carried Lauren as a baby now hovered above her chest, trembling, powerless. 2 nights later, a flash drive arrived at her doorstep. No label. Just a manila envelope shoved under her door during a thunderstorm. She'd been dozing on her couch when the wind carried the sound of paper across the hardwood floor. The footage inside was low resolution, but it shook her to her core. Dim hallways, women's voices, screams. A girl strapped to a metal table. Faces blurred. Nurses in private uniforms with no badges. At the end, one grainy frame, her niece's face, panicked, surrounded by surgical lights. Below the video, a single line of text. "Follow the rats." Rachel didn't sleep. She dug deep into federal databases, scanning every record tied to Lauren's last known location. All roads led to one place, Pine Ridge Correctional Compound, a privately run women's facility buried in the swamps of southern Mississippi. No press access, no civil oversight. The prison boasted one of the highest rates of behavioral reform in the country. She contacted internal channels. Most brushed her off. One sent her a warning. This facility's protected under neo-struct contracts, national security tier. You dig, you disappear. Rachel had seen this before. She knew when fear cloaked corruption. She'd spent the last 20 years fighting institutional rot from the inside, exposing fraudulent rehab centers, breaking illegal adoption rings hiding behind church walls, taking down judges who sold juveniles to labor camps. But this wasn't just another system failure. This was personal. She requested satellite footage of the prison compound. She tapped into logistics data, noting inconsistencies in medical transport logs. Women discharged on paper but never showing up at their destinations. Shipments labeled as biomedical waste, leaving the compound under sealed contracts. Every breadcrumb led to a deeper hell. One file mentioned something called Level D. No inmate records matched the designation. No staffing rosters listed its personnel. In fact, Level D didn't officially exist. But in the grainy video, she remembered one woman whispering, just before being dragged into darkness, "Not D, please, not Level D." Lauren's body had been cremated by the state before Rachel could request a second examination. But she didn't need more autopsies. She needed proof, real, irrefutable, public. And she knew what that meant. She would have to go inside. She reached out to a contact she hadn't spoken to in years. Vince Mattingly, a former FBI agent turned rogue fixer, known in certain circles for his ability to make people disappear, or appear, depending on the payment. Rachel had once saved his brother from a federal indictment. Now it was time to collect. Within weeks, a new identity was born. Nia Foster, 42, African-American, former registered nurse in Dallas, convicted of second-degree murder in a mercy killing scandal. Sentenced to 6 years. Transferred to Pine Ridge for special correctional reconditioning. Her fabricated file was nearly bulletproof. Court records, forged signatures, psychiatric assessments, all polished and inserted into federal databases. Neil Struct would see her as another disposable number. Rachel sat through a sham arraignment. She wore handcuffs in a fake courtroom with a real judge who owed too many favors to say no. No press, no family. The verdict was swift. She was in the back of a prison transport bus 2 days later. The drive into Pine Ridge was long, and silent swamps flanked the 2-lane road. There were no towns for 30 miles. The air grew thick, buzzing with insects and humidity. The road ended at a gate surrounded by tall pine trees and concertina wire. A drone hovered overhead as they approached. The guards were waiting. "Welcome to Pine Ridge," one of them drawled, tall and thick-necked with mirrored sunglasses. "You belong to us now." Rachel said nothing. She had to remember who she was now. Nia, weak, timid, nobody. They stripped her in the intake room. 4 guards, no curtains, a running faucet masking laughter. Her fingernails were scraped clean, her hair cut short, every personal item confiscated. The uniform they gave her was 2 sizes too small. In a moment of brief privacy, Rachel caught her reflection in a cracked mirror. She looked like someone else. That was good. That was the point. They tattooed her wrist with a QR code and a number, C3157. A female warden, white, buzzcut, with a coiled whip on her belt, leaned in and whispered, "This is a place for obedience, not redemption. Forget whatever you were. You're just meat now." That night, Rachel lay on a rotting mattress, every muscle aching, trying to breathe through the stench of mildew and bleach. Her cellmate didn't speak. She only rocked in the corner, mouthing something over and over. Maybe a prayer, maybe nothing. At midnight, a scream echoed from down the corridor, then 2, then silence. Rachel didn't sleep. Her body shook with exhaustion, but her mind stayed alert. She counted every footstep outside the cell, memorized the guard shift patterns, watched the shadows on the wall. By morning, she had decided one thing. If she had to crawl through hell to expose the truth, she would do it. If she had to bleed, she would bleed. But she would not break. Not here. Not where they buried her niece alive. The first morning in Pine Ridge began not with sunlight, but with a siren. A deep mechanical howl tore through the silence like a blade, vibrating the metal bed frame against Rachel's back. Her body jolted upright. She had barely slept, and when she did, her dreams were thick with screams and faces she couldn't name. The stench of mildew and urine clung to her skin. As she sat up, blinking in the pale blue light from the hallway, her cellmate still rocked silently in the corner, arms wrapped around her knees, her eyes vacant as if she'd already been hollowed out and left behind. The door to the cell groaned open with hydraulic finality. A guard barked something unintelligible, and before Rachel could gather her thoughts, she was yanked up by the arm and shoved into a line of women already assembling in the corridor. No one made eye contact. The silence was total except for the rhythmic stomp of boots and the occasional muttered command. Rachel tried to regulate her breathing, to remain in character. Nia was timid. Nia was forgettable. Nia didn't question. She kept her head down and moved with the herd. They were marched single file to a processing bay where a line of women in soiled uniforms stood barefoot on the cold concrete floor. A towering male officer, his belt heavy with zip ties and pepper spray, patrolled between them like a warden of the underworld. He gestured to a row of crates stacked with what looked like dented plastic trays and plastic utensils. "Breakfast," he said, his southern drawl thick and wet. "Eat fast. You'll earn your next meal." Rachel stepped forward and picked up a tray. The contents were barely food. A slice of grayish meat product, a scoop of cold grits, and a cup of orange liquid that smelled faintly of ammonia. Her stomach twisted, but hunger and weakness would make her a target. She forced herself to swallow the bites mechanically, watching the guards more than the women around her. Most ate quickly, eyes trained on their food or the floor. To her left, one woman coughed blood into her cup. No one reacted. Rachel's jaw clenched. Every instinct screamed to act, to say something, to demand answers, but that would get her noticed. She needed to observe, document, survive. The first full day at Pine Ridge was a descent into a new kind of hell. After breakfast, they were herded outside into a yard flanked by high concrete walls topped with razor wire. The sun was a brutal glare above. Rows of women stood at attention as officers shouted drills, forcing them to jog in place, drop to the ground, stand again. Anyone too slow received a jab from a stun baton. One woman fainted. The guards stepped over her as if she were debris. Rachel kept pace, sweat pouring down her back, legs burning. Her body remembered old pain, but her mind cataloged everything: the position of the cameras, the gaps in the patrol routes, the timing between whistles. It wasn't just training, it was conditioning, dehumanization disguised as discipline. Back inside, she was assigned to blockwork detail. This meant scrubbing floors, cleaning toilets, and carting out bins of bloodied laundry. She was handed a cracked plastic mop and ordered into the north wing, a dim hallway that reeked of bleach and despair. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, and each step echoed like a heartbeat in a tomb. It was there, in the shadows between cells, that she first met Rosario. The young woman was crouched beside a utility cart, her belly visibly swollen beneath her uniform. Sweat glistened on her brow. When Rachel knelt to help her lift a fallen bin, Rosario looked up sharply, as if expecting to be struck. "You're new," she said, her voice flat but accented with soft Spanish inflection. Rachel nodded, keeping her movements slow. "They'll break you if they notice you," Rosario warned. "Stay invisible." Rachel whispered, "Why do they let you work like this? You're pregnant?" Rosario let out a joyless laugh. "They don't care. The baby's not for me." Before Rachel could ask more, a guard rounded the corner and barked at them to move. Rosario's face returned to stone. Later that night, after being locked back into her cell, Rachel collapsed onto the mattress, her body aching in every joint. Her cellmate hadn't moved all day. She still sat curled up in the corner, whispering a litany of numbers and names. Rachel listened. The sequence repeated over and over. C2241, D009, J88. A pattern. Maybe a memory. She filed it away. Just after, lights out, the hallway filled with noise, keys jangling, boots thudding. A guard opened a nearby cell and dragged out a woman by the arm. She screamed once, then went silent. Rachel sat up, heart pounding. More guards moved down the corridor, methodically selecting women. Every third or fourth door opened. Screams, silence. The cycle repeated. This happened again the following night. By the third night, Rachel realized the pattern. Women who mouthed off, women who hesitated, women who cried. These were the ones taken, and they never came back. She began to recognize the signals. Guards tapping their clipboards, whispering code numbers into their radios. There was a system here, a routine, a methodical harvesting of fear. She needed evidence. Using a small thread from her pillow seam, she rewrapped the tiny camera sewn into the collar of her uniform. During chores, she walked slowly past mirrors and polished metal surfaces to calibrate the angle. At night, she positioned her pillow to point toward the cell door. The footage wouldn't be perfect, but it would show enough. Face of violence, the routine. The turning point came during a shift in the laundry wing. Rachel was pushing a bin of uniforms soaked in dark stains when a woman, barefoot, barely conscious, was dragged past her by two guards. One muttered, "Level D intake," as they passed. The woman's arm dangled, broken at the elbow. Her face was swollen, lips cracked, but Rachel saw the tattoo on her neck, a blue number. The same one whispered by her cellmate at night. Later, she asked Rosario what Level D meant. Rosario froze. "Don't ask. Don't say it. You hear that letter, you shut up and look away." "But what is it?" Rachel pressed gently. Rosario's voice dropped. "The last stop. That's where they take the ones who can't be sold." "Sold?" Rosario's eyes filled with something deeper than fear. Resignation. Clients pay for visits, for bodies, some for one night, some for parts. Level D is for parts. Rachel couldn't breathe. Back in her cell, she lay awake listening to the scraping of metal, the shifting of bodies, the breath of her ghost-like roommate. She whispered softly, "Lauren, I'm going to find them. I swear it." The next morning, her number was called C3157. She was being moved to Block C. As she packed her few belongings, Rosario passed by on her own assignment. She didn't speak, but their eyes met. Rachel saw it clearly now. Rosario had accepted her fate. Rachel had not. The new block was cleaner but colder. Cameras were more visible, uniforms tighter, the mattresses softer, the food marginally better. It was all a deception, a grooming space. The women here walked differently, heads low, movements rehearsed, their eyes glassy. She was handed a new jumpsuit, black, form-fitting, a subtle silver band across the chest. "You're in the showcase unit now," said the attendant. "Smile when spoken to." Rachel nodded, deadpan. Her stomach turned. Block C wasn't a privilege. It was pre-selection. These were the women being prepped for sale. On her second day, a clipboard was posted near the showers. Names, dates, client codes. Next to each, a flag. Singapore, UAE, Texas. Rachel scanned it. Next to her name, pending, medical clearance required. She had 3 days. That night, she crawled beneath her bed frame and retrieved the cloth-wrapped camera. As the lights dimmed and footsteps passed, she pressed record. The silence felt heavier now, like the air knew what was coming. Rachel didn't flinch. She had come here for the truth, and Pine Ridge was about to give it to her. Rachel quickly learned that Block C was a different kind of prison. Here, cruelty didn't wear the face of brute force. It came dressed in professionalism, in polite orders wrapped in cold voices, in medical checkups that led nowhere, and in reassurances whispered by the very people orchestrating hell. It was the waiting room of the slaughterhouse, sterile and calm, where the condemned were made to feel like assets, not humans. On her third day in C, she was assigned a new cell. It was slightly larger, with better lighting and a private sink. The concrete floor had been painted a pale gray, and there were no obvious signs of mold or rust. But the cleanliness only deepened her unease. There was something surgical about this wing, something that made her skin itch. The other women here were younger, quieter, more obedient. They moved like puppets, trained to stay still until told otherwise. Each woman had a number on her sleeve and a small barcoded tag stitched just below the collarbone of her uniform. Rachel quickly learned what they meant. Those with green tags were new intakes. Yellow tags indicated behaviorally adjusted, which meant compliant, emotionally flattened. Red tags were rare and marked as ready for transfer. Transfer where, no one said. At breakfast, Rachel sat beside a young woman named Camilla who barely touched her food. Her face was pale, hollowed by exhaustion. When Rachel quietly asked her what the red tags meant, Camilla glanced toward the camera dome in the ceiling, then whispered without turning her head. "It means they've been chosen. For travel." "Travel where?" Rachel asked. Camilla's eyes watered. "Out of the country, out of their body. Depends on the price." Later that day, Rachel was summoned to the medical bay. 2 guards escorted her down a narrow hallway that curved at a slight angle, so you could never see more than 20 feet ahead. The floors here were polished, and the walls were lined with frosted glass windows behind which shadows moved. Nurses, doctors, men in suits. She was led to a private exam room and ordered to strip. The nurse was a white woman in her 50s with a friendly smile and gloves that never stopped moving. She took blood, urine, scanned her retina, and made casual conversation as if they were at a spa. Rachel didn't respond to the small talk. She kept her eyes on the ceiling and counted the seconds between each beep of the monitor. When the nurse left, Rachel was alone for 2 minutes. She used the opportunity to scan the room. Ceiling, corners, under the sink. A small plastic folder sat on the counter with 3 names, including her own, labeled Final Eval. She had passed the health inspection. Back in her cell that night, Rachel sat on her bunk, holding a spoon she had stolen from the cafeteria, staring at the slightly uneven seam in the wall near the sink. She used the spoon's edge to wedge open a hairline crack, then carefully inserted a square of cloth. Inside was the camera, still functioning, still recording. She adjusted its angle toward the door and returned to the bed. That night, she watched through half-closed eyes as the hallway filled with motion. At exactly 2:13 a.m., 2 guards in black uniforms arrived with a rolling stretcher. They entered the cell across from hers. 10 minutes later, they emerged with a limp woman under a sheet. The sheet wasn't covering a body so much as hiding evidence. Rachel could see the blood-stained soles of bare feet and one pale arm dangling over the side. The next morning, that cell was empty. No one asked where the girl had gone. The next night, it happened again. Different room, different woman, same stretcher. Rachel's pulse thundered in her ears. Her camera had captured both incidents, time-stamped, angle-marked. The footage alone wouldn't be enough. She needed names. She needed records. On the fourth day, she faked a fainting spell during laundry duty. As planned, the guard assigned to her had to run for help. While alone in the supply closet, Rachel forced open the maintenance panel behind the detergent shelves. Inside were wires, a rotor, and a tablet mounted to the wall, used to log transport manifests and room assignments. She scrolled quickly. Rows of data streamed past her eyes. Names, numbers, codes, destinations. Some were marked departed medical custody. Others simply read disposed. One name froze her hand. Lauren Moore. Her niece's name appeared on a transfer manifest dated 4 months prior, with the notation Full Harvest, Tier 3 authorized. A second entry listed a location in Panama and the word disbursed. Rachel nearly dropped the tablet. Her breath caught in her throat. It was real. Everything. She gritted her teeth and took a picture with the tiny camera in her collar. She scrolled further. Dozens of names. Hundreds. Some she recognized from whispers on the block. Others had never even appeared in official prison records. Their bodies, their lives, had been rewritten, erased with the keystroke of a corporate ledger. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat with her back to the wall, hands wrapped around her knees, while her heart beat like a war drum. Everything was becoming clearer. Block C was a grooming zone. Level D was the final destination. The system was not just corrupt, it was designed for extraction. At dinner, she found Rosario. The woman was thinner than before, her belly lower, her eyes shadowed with terror. Rachel sat beside her, careful not to touch. "I saw her name," Rachel whispered. "Lauren. She was sent to Panama, disbursed." Rosario's jaw trembled. She looked down. "They told me they'd let me keep my baby if I behaved. They lied." Rosario shook her head. "I know." A week passed. Rachel continued collecting footage, transfers, intake routines, surveillance logs. The camera in her wall now held several hours of critical evidence. At every opportunity, she moved like a ghost, silent, unnoticed, watching everything. But the guards were growing more aggressive. Twice, women from her block were beaten for moving too slowly. One was dragged screaming into the showers and returned unconscious. The tension hung heavy in the air. Then her name was called. Rachel was summoned not to medical, but to processing. When she arrived, she was met by 2 guards in black, not gray. They looked different. Leaner, colder, tactical. "Transfer authorization confirmed," one said without emotion. "Client en route." They didn't even look at her. Back in her cell, Rachel paced like a caged animal. Time was collapsing. She was being sent to Level D. She had no way to stop it. That night, Rosario appeared at her door during laundry collection. She wasn't supposed to be there. The guards were distracted. She whispered through the slot. "They're taking you tomorrow." Rachel pressed her face to the metal. "Where's Level D?" Rosario didn't answer. She only mouthed 2 words. "Don't go." But there was no choice. At 4:27 a.m., the lights in her cell clicked on. 2 guards entered with restraints. Rachel offered no resistance. They shackled her wrists and ankles and led her down a corridor she hadn't seen before. Past the kitchen, past the incinerator room, down a narrow hall marked Authorized Medical Only. The floor changed from concrete to tile. The air grew colder. They reached a door with no handle, no keypad, just a black lens that scanned the guards' badges and then Rachel's face. It opened. Behind it, a staircase spiraled downward. No cameras, no windows, no return. Rachel stepped into the dark. The door closed behind her. The air at the bottom of the staircase smelled of bleach, blood, and something older, rot held beneath layers of antiseptic, like a crime scene washed clean too many times. Rachel stepped off the final stair onto a smooth, pale green floor that gave under her boots like rubber. The walls were a sickly shade of white, sterile but stained, as if no amount of scrubbing could remove the memory of what they had witnessed. The guards flanked her in silence, guiding her down a long corridor without speaking. Their faces remained blank, but their eyes darted to the sides, never quite meeting hers. She felt less like a prisoner and more like a shipment. The hallway ended at a set of double doors with no handles. A red light blinked overhead. One guard held up a small metal disc attached to a retractable chain on his belt. The light turned green, and the doors hissed open with a sound like something exhaling its last breath. Beyond the threshold, Level D revealed itself in all its concealed horror. The corridor expanded into a central hub ringed with glass rooms, each containing a single bed and a set of restraints. Unlike the cells above, these rooms were lit brightly, too brightly, with overhead bulbs that hummed and flickered constantly. Some rooms were occupied. Rachel saw women lying motionless on beds, their arms strapped down, IV lines threaded into their skin, monitors humming steadily at their sides. One girl stared at the ceiling with vacant eyes, a breathing tube threaded through her mouth. Another turned her head slightly and mouthed something Rachel couldn't hear, her eyes wide and glassy. The silence was not one of peace, but of chemical sedation. She passed a room with its door slightly ajar. Inside, a metal table was stained dark along the edges. Surgical tools lay on a tray nearby, gleaming under the harsh lights. A camera was mounted above, its red dot blinking steadily. Behind the table stood a tall man in a white coat, bald with wire-rimmed glasses. He didn't look up as Rachel was escorted past. He was carefully folding gauze into a steel container as if preparing for another procedure. There was no hurry in his movements, no urgency, only the mechanical efficiency of repetition. They reached a final hallway marked in bold red letters. Authorized surgical transfer, tier access only. At its end stood a thick steel door. The guard closest to Rachel pressed a fingerprint to a scanner, and the door groaned open. Inside was a room unlike the others. It was quieter. A cold table sat in the center, surrounded by machines Rachel recognized from trauma hospitals. Heart monitors, blood filtration units, oxygen regulators. Cabinets lined the walls, filled with labeled bags and metal trays. Along one wall was a computer monitor, its screen displaying a live feed of medical data, heart rates, oxygen levels, blood compatibility charts. Underneath, a list of names, each one followed by a number, a flag, and a green check mark. Her name was near the bottom. Nia Foster, Tier 2 compatibility. Client, confidential, estimated value, $280,000. The man in the white coat entered the room, glancing briefly at her without expression. He spoke not to her, but to the guards. Prepare her for preliminary screening. Full spectrum, no sedation. Rachel's breath caught. Her pulse surged, but she forced herself to remain still. The guards moved quickly, efficiently, as if they'd done this 100 times before. They unlocked her restraints and guided her toward the table. She lay down, her back pressing against the cool metal. Leather straps were secured across her wrists and ankles. A nurse entered, young, blonde, wearing pale green scrubs and a mask. Her hands didn't shake. She didn't look at Rachel. Wires were attached to her temples. A clamp was placed on her finger. A bright light beamed into her eyes. The machine beside her beeped once, then began to hum. "Vital baseline confirmed," the nurse said softly. The man in the white coat, she now saw the name stitched into his chest, Dr. H. Renner, stepped closer and examined a digital tablet. He tapped through screens, nodding occasionally. "She's strong, good muscle density, no signs of degeneration. Liver shows elevated stress, likely trauma-related, not significant." Rachel clenched her jaw. Her hands, though restrained, flexed beneath the straps. Her breathing stayed even. She had to remember who she was, what she had come here for. Every moment in this place was being recorded, not by surveillance, but by the camera hidden in her collarbone seam. Renner leaned over her face. His eyes were devoid of warmth, clinical and distant. "We're going to run a full imaging scan," he said. "After that, you'll be placed under observation. No questions, no movement. Understood?" She nodded. They wheeled her through another set of doors into a smaller room containing a CT scanner. The ceiling here was low, the walls padded. The guards stepped outside while the nurse administered contrast fluid through a vein in her arm. Rachel watched the fluid enter her bloodstream, cold and metallic. She felt it spread through her chest, her abdomen, her brain. She was inside the scanner for 10 minutes. 10 minutes of spinning, humming, and mechanical precision. 10 minutes during which she replayed every step of her plan, every piece of evidence collected, every whisper, every name. When it ended, they returned her to her glass room, strapped her back to the bed, and dimmed the lights. No explanation, no timeline, just silence. Rachel remained awake. Hours passed. Her stomach ached with hunger. Her mouth was dry. No one came. Then, sometime around what felt like night, a face appeared at the window. A woman. Black, late 30s, hair pulled into a tight bun, eyes alert but tense. She wore a guard's uniform, but her posture was off. She glanced behind her before tapping twice on the glass. Rachel blinked in response. The woman entered quickly, closing the door behind her. She approached the bed and leaned down. "My name is Joan," she whispered. "You're being moved in the morning. They already tagged your heart for extraction. Full Tier 2 clearance. Once they verify tissue compatibility, they'll take the rest." Rachel didn't flinch. "Then why are you here?" "Because you're not like the others. And because I've had enough of this place." Joan removed something small from her pocket, a plastic disc the size of a coin. She slipped it under Rachel's pillow. "Tracker, remote trigger. You'll press it when the extraction begins. You have one shot." "Who gets the signal?" "Whoever you sent your last upload to. If they're watching, they'll come." Rachel swallowed hard. "And if they don't?" Joan met her eyes. "Then you better make sure someone lives to tell the story." She was gone before Rachel could speak again. The next morning, she was unstrapped and escorted to the preparation chamber. Dr. Renner greeted her with a cold smile. On the screen behind him, her organ map glowed bright blue. "All markers confirmed. Transport team will arrive within the hour. Let's get you prepped." Rachel's heart pounded. She forced herself to tremble, to appear broken. "I'm scared," she whispered. "Will it hurt?" Renner looked amused. Only for a moment. She was guided onto a padded surgical bed. A nurse swabbed her chest. Machines were activated. Renner leaned in to place the oxygen mask over her face. That's when she pressed the trigger beneath the thin mattress. The red light blinked once, then again. Outside the prison walls, miles away, a signal burst to life. A laptop lit up in a parked car. A journalist's eyes widened. He hit stream. Back in the operating chamber, Rachel let the mask settle over her mouth. Her eyes met the camera in the ceiling. She spoke through clenched teeth. "You're not harvesting another woman today." Renner paused. "What?" And then the power flickered. Alarms began to sound. Joan's voice echoed over the intercom, distorted and desperate. "They know. They're coming. Lock it down." Screams erupted down the corridor. Doors slammed. Sirens howled. Rachel tore free of her straps using the blade hidden in her waistband, the one Joan had given her. She rolled off the table as Renner lunged for her, slashing his hand as she escaped. She burst through the surgical wing and into chaos. Level D was no longer a secret. It was a battlefield. The power didn't go out all at once. It flickered like a dying pulse, first in the surgical wing, then across the narrow corridors of Level D. The overhead lights stuttered, monitors dimmed and blinked back to life, and the rhythmic hum of machinery faltered for a few breathless seconds. That was all Rachel needed. She was off the table before anyone in the room understood what had happened. The scalpel Joan had slipped her, disguised as a broken ID tag, cut swiftly through the last of the leather restraints. As Dr. Renner leaned forward, shouting, she slashed across his hand and shoved him backward into a tray of instruments. He stumbled, bleeding, and crashed into the equipment with a howl. The nurse screamed. Rachel bolted for the exit, still barefoot, her body aching from tension and the IV punctures on her arms. The hallway beyond was a mess of alarms and flashing red lights. Voices shouted down corridors, confused, panicked, aggressive. Somewhere, a klaxon had begun to sound, long and shrill, a call to lockdown. Rachel ducked behind a supply cart as two guards rushed past her, weapons drawn, radios crackling. She reached under her gown and found the second disc Joan had given her, a backup transmitter linked directly to the journalist's laptop parked outside Pine Ridge's jurisdiction. She pressed it twice, holding it firmly until the green light pulsed to life. Miles away, in a rented van hidden along a dirt service road, a man named Trent Young, a freelance investigative reporter Rachel had once briefed during a trafficking case, jerked awake as his monitor lit up. The signal came through, an encrypted stream from Rachel's body cam, overlaid with telemetry from the tracker. He recognized her voice instantly, even distorted by the stress and distance. "This is Nia Foster, real name Rachel Moore, DOJ Internal Affairs. If you're watching this, I've uncovered an active human organ trafficking operation inside Pine Ridge Correctional Compound. They're harvesting prisoners. I have names. I have footage. And I'm not alone." Trent didn't hesitate. He clicked Go Live. Back inside the prison, Rachel crept along the wall, moving toward the administrative exit of Level D. Her camera was still rolling, capturing everything: women sedated and strapped to gurneys, blood-streaked hallways, surgical waste bins filled with discarded tissue and crimson-stained gauze. In one room, she found Rosario, dazed but alive, her wrists bound, her belly still round beneath the surgical gown. Rachel moved quickly, cutting through the restraints. "Rachel?" Rosario blinked through tears. "You're safe now. Come on, we're getting out." Screams echoed from deeper inside the level, guards yelling orders, patients moaning, metal doors slamming shut. Rachel took Rosario's hand and together they ran, dodging the chaos. An automated announcement began repeating over the speakers. "Security breach in surgical zone. Initiate containment protocol. All staff report to muster points. Code black." They reached a freight elevator and climbed through the half-open doors into the shaft. Rachel boosted Rosario first, then pulled herself up the greasy metal ladder, heart hammering. Halfway up, the elevator jolted and shuddered. It was being summoned back down. They climbed faster. At the top, a vent cover hung loose. Rachel forced it open with her elbow and crawled into the duct, dragging Rosario behind her. The air inside was hot and thick with dust, but it was freedom, an unmonitored passageway, likely forgotten by the staff. They moved in silence for 20 minutes, crawling, twisting through turns, until a grate revealed a view of the corridor above the prison laundry. Rachel kicked it open and dropped into the hallway. Rosario landed behind her with a groan. They were back in Block B. It was chaos. Women were shouting, guards were panicking. Rachel could hear doors slamming, radios screaming conflicting commands. One voice on the intercom, male, older, was screaming about a media breach, demanding an immediate network blackout. But it was too late. The stream was already online. Thousands were watching. The footage was raw, unfiltered. Cameras caught limp bodies being dragged by staff in surgical garb, spreadsheets filled with organ-matching data, emails linking Pine Ridge administrators to off-site clinics across state lines. Trent had patched in commentary from a trauma surgeon, a former inmate, and a civil rights attorney. All live. All aghast. "This is not just negligence," the surgeon said, his voice trembling. "This is state-sanctioned eugenics. This is what medical war crimes look like." The story hit every major network within the hour. Back inside, Rachel led Rosario toward the maintenance wing, where Joan had set a service tunnel connected to the generator building. They moved quickly, weaving through the dim, chaotic corridors. When they reached the locked grate that led to the tunnel, Joan was already waiting. "You made it," she said out of breath, holding a bolt cutter. "I looped the internal alarms for 5 minutes. After that, I can't guarantee anything." "Where's the extraction point?" Rachel asked. Joan pointed to a digital watch on her wrist. "North utility exit. 30 minutes. A patrol unit's been diverted with a fake fire call. Use the confusion." Rosario hesitated. "What about the others?" Rachel looked at Joan. "How many can we take?" 5, maybe 6. You can't free them all now." Rachel made a decision. She handed Joan the camera. "Get this to the nearest U.S. Marshal office. Don't hand it to anyone in uniform inside Pine Ridge jurisdiction. Find someone clean." Joan nodded. Rachel took Rosario's hand and turned toward the hallway. Alarms were sounding again. Flashing lights bathed the walls in red. A pre-recorded warning played on loop. "All inmates return to quarters. Lethal force authorized." They ran. On the way, Rachel pulled open 3 more cells. One woman could barely walk, and Rosario helped her along. Another had blood on her face and no shoes. A third, a girl barely 20, just clung to Rachel like a child. They didn't ask questions. They followed. At the final checkpoint near the tunnel exit, a single guard stood blocking the way, young, jumpy, holding a baton. He raised it. "Stop right there. I said stop." Rachel moved quickly. She stepped forward, hands raised, eyes calm. "Look at me," she said. "You think this place is going to protect you? You think they'll cover for you after what the world just saw?" He hesitated. "The live stream," she said. "It's out there. Everyone's watching. Your badge number is probably already on a form somewhere." The baton lowered. He stepped aside. They slipped through the utility door just as the searchlights swept the yard. Outside, night had fallen and the air was cool. A white van waited beyond the fence. Joan had told the truth. It was real. The escape was real. Rachel turned to the women behind her, bleeding, broken, scared, and opened the gate. They ran. One by one, they climbed into the van. Rachel was the last. As she stepped inside, her vision blurred. Blood dripped from her side. She hadn't even noticed the wound, a deep gash from something sharp during the sprint. Trent was in the driver's seat. He turned, eyes wide. "Jesus, you made it." Rachel nodded, breathless. "Drive." They peeled away from the compound as sirens wailed behind them. Pine Ridge shrank in the distance, swallowed by the dark. An hour later, Rachel lay on a gurney in a safe house infirmary. A paramedic stitched her side while Trent uploaded the final batch of files. Networks across the country interrupted programming. Congressional hearings were announced. The president released a statement calling for a full investigation. But Rachel wasn't thinking about any of that. She looked at Rosario, asleep in a cot beside her, one hand on her belly. She looked at the other women, huddled under blankets, whispering, weeping, clinging to their second chance. She had done what she came to do, but she knew this was only the beginning. Pine Ridge was just one head of the monster, and the others were still hiding in the dark. Rachel stood before the mirror in the hotel room that served as her temporary safe house, watching her own reflection in the flickering fluorescent light. The bruises on her ribs were fading, but her face still bore the shadow of the hell she'd crawled out of. A faint scar above her left eyebrow marked where a piece of glass had sliced her during the escape. Her eyes looked older, more tired, more hollow, but beneath the fatigue there was a fire that hadn't dimmed. The televised footage of Pine Ridge had exploded across the country in the days following her escape. Every news station, social platform, and newspaper had run with the story, often using clips pulled from her own hidden camera. Women strapped to surgical tables, data logs of harvested organs, spreadsheets listing clients from across the globe. The stream had gone viral before Pine Ridge's internal systems could shut it down, and even then, it was too late. Copies had flooded the internet. What had once been whispers and rumors now lived in full color on the screens of millions. America had seen the truth, and for the first time it couldn't look away. Federal law enforcement had descended on the facility within 12 hours. The Department of Justice, under immense political pressure, launched a multi-agency task force to raid Pine Ridge and seize its assets. Armed marshals had stormed the compound and arrested the warden, Dr. Renner, several guards, and 2 corporate executives from Neostruct who had flown in under the pretense of an emergency audit. What they found behind the walls of that prison sent shockwaves through the nation. Unmarked graves, severed communication systems, and dozens of falsified death certificates. Refrigerated lockers beneath the infirmary held human organs with serial numbers that matched active insurance records. The underground database used to traffic these organs, a system internally dubbed the Pipeline, linked Pine Ridge to 7 other private correctional institutions across the United States. Rachel knew it wasn't just one prison, it was a network. She had cracked the shell, but the rot went deeper. Now she stood in front of a different kind of gate, a courtroom. The courthouse in Washington, D.C. had been chosen for its security and visibility. Protesters filled the street outside, waving signs that read, "Shut down the pipeline, no more blood money, and justice for the buried." The entrance was flanked by federal marshals in tactical gear. Cameras clicked as Rachel approached the doors. She wasn't in shackles anymore, but she carried the weight of dozens of women who hadn't survived long enough to see this day. Rosario walked beside her, still holding her swollen belly protectively, flanked by 2 trauma counselors and a social worker. She refused to be hidden. The courtroom itself was quiet but charged with tension. The prosecution table was stacked with evidence boxes and thick binders. Rachel took her seat in the first row behind the lead prosecutor, watching the defense team across the aisle. Dressed in expensive suits and feigned confidence, they sat beside the accused. Warden Gerald Miles, Dr. Harvey Renner, Logistics Officer Karen Spillman, and two neo-struck vice presidents, James Weller and Carla Ingram. They looked like corporate executives attending a conference, not like architects of torture. When the judge entered, a black woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and a gaze like sharpened glass, Rachel felt something shift. Judge Deidre Harlan was known for her unflinching courtroom demeanor and history of cracking down on institutional corruption. She didn't waste time with preambles. Opening statements began within the hour. The prosecution didn't hold back. With the nation watching, Assistant U.S. Attorney Marcus Dandridge laid out the full scope of the operation: a corporate conspiracy to exploit the incarcerated for medical profit, a system that used sentencing loopholes, falsified documents, and administrative immunity to turn prisoners into commodities. Testimony began with former guards, then medical techs who turned state's evidence. They described quotas, bonuses for successful matches, and the monthly visits from foreign buyers posing as health contractors. Then came the digital forensic experts. They showed videos from Rachel's camera, explained metadata, and proved the edits and deletions from neo-struct servers. One slide showed a heat map of facility usage, highlighting rooms not listed on any blueprint. Another slide revealed communication between Dr. Renner and an offshore clinic in the Caymans, openly discussing pre-cleared inventory and rapid turnaround removals. But the courtroom truly changed when the survivors took the stand. Rosario testified through tears, but with a spine of iron. She spoke of the nights when women were pulled from their bunks, the humiliation of being labeled with numbers and colors, the trauma of having to pretend compliance to protect her unborn child. She recounted how the guards used her pregnancy to taunt her, how they promised she'd never see her baby. She looked the defense lawyers in the eye and said, "They didn't care if I lived. I was just a vessel, an asset." Then came others. Aisha, who had spent months sedated in Level B, trembled as she described waking up to find the scar across her abdomen, only to be told she had suffered a seizure. A young woman named Layla described being drugged and flown to a mansion in Florida for therapy, only to be assaulted and returned 2 days later with no memory of how she got there. Every testimony deepened the silence in the room. Rachel watched as the defense squirmed, offering procedural objections and flimsy denials. Their strategy hinged on claiming lack of knowledge, that neo-struct was unaware of the local practices, that medical procedures were subcontracted, that Dr. Renner was a rogue operative. But emails and signatures betrayed their lies. Every time they tried to deflect blame, another piece of documentation would be presented: contracts, logs, surveillance footage, voice recordings. It was a meticulous takedown. The final witness was Rachel herself. She took the stand wearing a plain suit and no makeup, refusing to appear as anything but what she was: a woman who had gone to hell and come back with the receipts. She described the setup, the infiltration, the conditions, the patterns. She named names. She described the moment she found Lauren's name in the database. When the prosecutor asked her what she saw that day, she looked straight at the judge and answered, "I saw my niece being priced like meat. I saw a flag next to her name. I saw a number. I saw that they had cut her apart and sold the pieces, and I realized she wasn't the first." When asked what she wanted from this court, she paused. Then she said, "Not just prison, not just fines. I want the world to understand that this system didn't malfunction. It worked exactly as it was designed, and it has to be dismantled." There was silence. Even the defense lawyers stopped writing. The trial lasted for 29 days. The verdict was unanimous. All 5 defendants were found guilty of conspiracy to traffic humans, second-degree murder, obstruction of justice, and illegal organ procurement. The judge sentenced each of them to life in federal prison without parole, and Neostruck's corporate charter was permanently revoked. Their assets were frozen, redirected to a National Victim Restitution Fund. Judge Harlan spoke directly to the gallery during sentencing. This court acknowledges the failure not only of a company but of a system that let profit override humanity. May this ruling mark the beginning of true reform, not just words on paper. Outside, the crowd erupted, but Rachel didn't join them. She slipped out through a side door, walking past the steps where the media had gathered, her name now a symbol, a headline, a rallying cry. She walked until the sounds of cameras and applause faded behind her. She didn't want celebration. Not yet. She had a different destination. At a secure facility on the outskirts of town, she entered a large white building that had once been an office park. Inside, rows of hospital beds were arranged in gentle arcs beneath skylights. The women resting there were survivors from Pine Ridge and other prisons now under investigation. Counselors moved quietly between them. One wing had been converted into a nursery. Rosario sat in a rocking chair near the window, cradling a newborn boy. Rachel approached slowly. Rosario smiled. "I named him Justice." Rachel swallowed the lump in her throat. "It suits him." She reached out and touched the boy's tiny fingers. For a moment, everything was quiet, but only for a moment. Her phone buzzed. A message from the Department of Justice. A new tip. Another facility in Arizona. Same contractor. Same patterns. Rachel looked at the boy again. Then she stood. This war wasn't over. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more. Check out the next video and explore others on our channel. Share this video to help spread the message.